Ah, the Honda Civic. We all know it. I'm sure at least one of you knows someone that's driving a Civic today. I sure do. For over 4 decades, they've been doing it right. However, there was one year in particular, that Honda fumbled with the Civic. And even after reading all the heckling that this car went through when it was new, I still don't necessarily understand why. So today, we have the 2012 Honda Civic Si, and we're gonna see why people dislike this car so much. Let's get started. On this near 20-degree day, I welcome you to the Civic Si, and in particular, this is the 9th generation of Honda's Civic. These went from the 2012 model year to the 2015 model year in the United States. Europe and some other markets also got the 9th generation Civic, but it was a smaller car. You could either get that as a hatchback by nature or a station wagon. And believe it or not, even though this is the car of Japan, the 9th gen Civic was not available in Japan at all, giving the Civic a 7-year hiatus in its home country. Of course, there were some Type R models that we didn't get, but that was a very low production number. In regards to our own 9th gen, this is actually not the Civic that we were supposed to get. Honda was actually planning to make the original 9th gen Civic larger, more powerful, and a bit more upmarket compared to the 8th generation Civic. For those that can remember, at the time, the economy was absolutely in the trash for automobiles and also people. Honda's CEO Takanobu Ito said that due to market changes and the rapidly changing economy, kind of for the worse at the time, Honda had to scrap their idea, and they thought we would be okay with something that was more affordable, simple, and economical. Clearly, we can see that decision backfired, because at the same time, while Honda was trying to be more frugal, all their competitors were boosting their build quality, which unfortunately hurt the Civic even more. When the 2012 Civic first came out, reviews were not kind to this thing. People called it lackluster. Some journalists at the time noted the cheaper interior quality of the 9th generation Civic. They also said that it didn't drive as well as the original one, not as sharp and agile, and this one was more like an appliance. Consumer Reports was so appalled by this Civic that they actually removed it off their recommendation list for their cars. That and all the other backlash that the 2012 Civic got really kicked Honda in the pants to make yet another emergency refresh. Now, this automotive debate on wheels belongs to my friend Noel. It's a 2012 Civic Si Coupe with the factory navigation system in Honda's Dyno Blue.
Dynaco Blue.
Dynaco Blue! This one is sitting at just under 110,000 miles, and it actually is just about ready for sale. Noel has had this for about 6 years, and it's been absolutely trouble-free, and it's bone stock. But if you're in this area and you're looking to buy a 9th gen, this one is right here. The factory MSRP of this particular car right next to me is just under $24,000, $23,855 to be exact. Just like the brand new 11th gen Si, these are only available in one trim level besides the option of summer tires or all-season tires, but one trim level and one engine. That's all you get. Also, one transmission option too. So because this one is the Civic Si, this in fact, my friends, has the engine that the kids like. This is the K24 Z7. It's a 2.4 liter dual overhead cam inline 4. Of course, it has VTEC, but this is the more modern version, so it's called iVTEC. This is pretty similar to the K20 that preceded this, except for the slightly larger piston stroke that gives you that 0.4 liters. Again, just like the new Civic Si, it barely cracks 200 horsepower. This is 201 horsepower and 170 pound-feet of torque. Of course, this is front-wheel drive, and thankfully this uses a limited slip front differential and a standard 6-speed manual transmission. All of that gives this thing, which is just under 2,900 pounds, a 0 to 60 time of 6.5 seconds. That's acceptable. That's fun. Being 4-cylinder Hondas, of course, these use timing chains, so it does make these a little bit less needy than the V6 Hondas. But as far as Civics are concerned, these are extremely reliable. Besides the normal wear and tear items, and because this one is manual, you'll have to replace the clutch. This one has a relatively new clutch on it as well. So this thing and the other 9th gens that you'll see out there can absolutely do 200,000 miles easily. In terms of MPGs, because it's a Honda, it's good. 22 in the city, 31 on the highway, and a combined rating of 25. Those are pretty accurate numbers because I've been seeing 24 on the trip computer on this car. Not so bad, especially considering the fun that you get with this car. Before this first emergency refresh, the original 9th Gen Civic was again supposed to be a little bit larger than the previous 8th Gen Civic, of course. This one still is a little bit larger, sitting at 175 inches long, compared to the 8th Gen Coupe, which is 174 inches long. You can see the 9th Gen continues Honda's one motion design with a slightly longer grille, the big windshield, and the shape of it that makes it kind of look like an egg. It is a nice looking egg though, and because this one is the Civic Si, it's sitting on 17-inch alloy wheels. Because this is the pre-facelift model, even the wheel designs are a little bit more mundane. Even though this is a coupe, practicality is not at a loss. Remember, it is still a Honda Civic, so we still get a pretty big trunk. The only thing I would say I could complain about is that there's no release for the trunk behind the car. You either have to push and hold the button on the key fob or pull the lever inside, but it reveals a very usable 11.7 cubic feet of volume. It is a 60-40 split rear seat, even though it is a coupe. Also, underneath the floor in the trunk, there is a spare tire. It is a donut, but thankfully, in this era of car, spare tires were something that automakers thought about. Thankfully, Honda lets you get into the rear seat of the Si with relative ease. There is no power function like, a luxury coupe. We don't need that type of nonsense. Just a lever that folds and slides the seat so I can get in there and start warming up. It already is immediately way better back here because it's not 20 degrees. The driver's seat is in my position. It's actually a little bit farther back because Noel is a little taller than me. You can see the back, well, my knees are touching the seat. Headroom is still not that great. So, as we expected, this is not the type of car to be carrying a bunch of people in. That's why you get the Accord Coupe. There's no real amenities back here. There's like indents for cup holders or bottles on each side at least, but it's not an actual cup holder. But the seats thankfully aren't too uncomfortable, so not too bad. Yeah, let's get out of here. As we enter the 9th Gen Si, welcome to the interior of this thing. It's actually nice in here, upon first glance. Because it's cold, we're going to start this thing up. You don't have any nonsense like push button start like the new Si. We just have the normal blade key. This is the key. For the 9th Gen Si, it was focusing on my face. But the typical Honda key, the lock, unlock, trunk release, and the panic button over here. In typical Honda fashion, these do like to break, so this one is a little bit loose. You can just get a new key fob from eBay. But because of this, we don't have push button start. You could just put your foot on the clutch, make sure you're in neutral, and start this thing to go. The K24 is really quiet. So welcome to the interior of the 9th Gen Civic Si. As you can see, it's pretty similar to the interior of the 8th Gen actually, so if you're coming from that, you won't be too far off. We can see how the power is. There's a light that tells you if VTEC is engaged. It also works as a shift light as well. Like, it's fun. It gets to speed very quickly. It's not like it's super fast or anything like that, but it puts a smile on my face. This isn't the type of car, though, for straight roads. This is the type of car for, windy, curvy roads, because The nimbleness of this chassis is why people buy this, but I won't get too distracted by the fun parts of the car just yet. We have a little bit of discussing to do. First of all, while I'm gripping it, we can talk about this 3-spoke leather-wrapped steering wheel. It is nice. It is specific to the Civic Si because you can see the Si logo on the bottom of it. It has a nice feeling to your hand, makes it very easy to control this car. There are also some buttons on the wheel. On the left side of the wheel, we can see that there's audio controls as well as a button that controls the iMid. That's part of the gauges up there. We'll go into that in just a moment. There's also buttons for the Bluetooth phone and also the voice control. On the right side, those are just the buttons to control the cruise control. Something that you will notice about this wheel though is even though this has just under 110,000 miles, there is a considerable amount of wear on it, like on the actual steering wheel part itself and also the buttons that are most frequently touched. All the main touch points of this car seem to have worn out, you know, un-Honda-like. This is more like early to mid 2000s Nissan in here with the peeling paint and everything. Thankfully, because this is a small car, it has a nice tight turning circle. It's very nimble to drive. Of course, as I'm driving like this, it's very easy. The clutch pedal, it's very light, but it has a nice amount of rebound or spring to it. It kind of engages more at the bottom, which may confuse some people. The shifter feels nice. It's also very light and very easy to just flick around into any gear. No complaints on my behalf. The only thing that I will say is that another high touch point in this car is the shift knob, and you can see again at this mileage, the shift knob has really worn poorly in my opinion. I guess I'll just do the rest of the nitpicking up front because I wanted to see why people didn't like this car. First, and I think primarily, compared to the 8th gen. The 8th gen Civic, of course, is a cheap car, but it had some soft touch materials like on the dash. But this car, it's just a sea of plastic everywhere. The dash is all plastic. It's just a bunch of different colors and textures. The texture on the dash and the door cards is kind of weird, but even here, it's plastic. It's just not that great. Continuing that, even the window switches, those things are peeling a little bit. So it is shocking that for a Honda, a lot of these major touch points and normal creature comforts that you would expect are kind of lacking. We can see why this car makes up for it though. And that's what makes up for it. It really does. You can see at high speeds, wind noises, well, road noise and wind noise. Things are just noisy in here. I have to speak up to be talking to you. But it's very fun to drive. It's super nimble. The SI is mostly about the driving experience. So that's why, I don't know, I get why Honda was like, okay, well, you know, our buyers will, you know, be okay with sacrificing things like soft touch dash in the Civic, but I guess not everyone wanted that. I don't know. It's fun. Of course, it's not fast though, but it's really nice to be able to wring the engine out, use all of its power, get into VTEC, and have proper control of the drivetrain. It's very good. We still have some more discussing to do before I get too distracted. We can look at the gauges. Just like the 8th gen Civic, the 9th gen Civic has this 2-tier gauge setup as well. So the tachometer is at the bottom, and we have the speedometer, fuel gauge, and some of the other warning lights at the top. There's also what Honda calls an iMid, which is new for the 9th gen Civic. It's controlled by this button that's on the steering wheel itself. But there's a reasonable amount of information on it. That's where you'll find the trip computer and things like that. Of course, because this is the SI, everything in the gauges is red themed, and we have the red stitching, not only on the steering wheel, but also on the seats. I guess that's the next topic of discussion that we can go over. The seats are quite good. They're comfortable. It's kind of like a one-size-fits-all type of seat. That's what I would expect from Honda. They want all types of people to be able to hop in this. They still offer a good amount of support. I don't really move around that much. One, because they're cloth, and two, because they're pretty supportive. So it's a good all-around seat. The Civics have always been pretty comfortable. The interior feels very roomy. It doesn't feel like I'm cramped in a tiny car. It feels nice and spacious, especially this one has a sunroof. Like, it's a nice car. Of course, it's not super fancy, but that's, I don't know, it's a Civic. I wouldn't expect it to be super fancy. That's why I wouldn't give it too much grief because it has a plastic dash. I do understand in 2012 a car having a plastic dash. As you can see, this one has Honda's factory navigation for 2012. I actually don't like this intermediate era of Honda infotainment systems. The mid-2000s, when they were first doing the GPS and navigation, those systems were surprisingly responsive and good to use. This one, the interface is just a little bit confusing. I know it's only been a little bit with this car, but the interface just isn't as easy. There's also a lot of hard touch buttons on the sides of the touchscreen. I do know that this was a decade ago, but some of its competitors were already doing things like this back then. As you can see, we're always stuck behind NPCs in my area. It doesn't matter what time of day. I try to avoid them and they still just pop up. That's just what NPCs do. But if you want to drive like an NPC, like, you know, daily driver, this thing is very nice because the clutch and the shifter combination are very smooth and effortless. I haven't really been bothered that this car has been stick. Of course, I've driven this car a few other times before. We're hanging out with it today. And I've always had a good time with it. It's very easy to learn the clutch. It's very easy to learn rev matching and just overall manual transmission with this car. The brakes feel good. Of course, because it's not a Type R, you shouldn't expect like extreme response. And in typical Honda fashion, this has rev hang. I understand what people are talking about when it comes to the 9th gen not being as tight or aggressive as the 8th gen, because I spend time with an 8th gen as well, and I can already tell that the steering isn't as like zippy, and you know, it's not as razor sharp as the 8th gen. I also don't really have much road feel compared to the 8th gen. There is still a nice bit of response and force feedback, but it's not quite there. That doesn't mean that this doesn't handle well though, because even in its stock configuration, it's tuned to handle well. This has thicker sway bars than the normal Civics. This also has different springs. So it is, you know, it is a handler. Thankfully it rides pretty nice as well, because it's on stock suspension and the stock 17s, which people say it's monster truck height. Whatever. Also, in typical Civic fashion, the climate controls are very easy to reach and easy to use. This one has single zone climate control. Thankfully, because it's Honda, they've thought about things like storage and cup holders for the front seat passengers. And even though this is manual, the cup holders are big too. There's a reasonably sized center console. I will say that the material on the armrest is another place that you could call this car cheap. Yeah, there's good torque. Of course, you do have to wind it out, so you notice that, but it has more torque than the older Honda 4-cylinders that I've driven, so that's funny. Is this guy gonna run the light or no? Thankfully not. It's easy. It's easy to drive. It sounds good. That's also something. I'm not used to listening to Hondas that are quiet. Like, this doesn't have an intake an exhaust, nothing. This is just like how you would get one at the factory, which is cool. Once again, you can see the nice tight turning circle of the SI. It's really maneuverable. That's something that, you know, it's a fun to drive car that you don't really compromise space. It's good. It accelerates well. I mean, 6.5 seconds to 60 isn't that slow. It's fun. It's funny, as I drive this, I see why some of my friends, like Matt, he's had like 4 or 5 9th gen SIs, maybe more than that. I see why he likes them, and I see why he wants them to be faster, because if I own this car, I would understand. I wish it made just a little bit more power too. This car does everything well, but I feel like the 2012s just do everything well, but they could be great. At the end of the day, I still think that the 9th gen is a wonderful car. It really has a great driving experience. The K24 is very willing. The 6-speed shifts into every gear like butter. It's just a great car. I kind of do understand what people are talking about in terms of interior quality, because it's just a sea of plastic inside. There's not one soft touch material inside of this car. And I do agree that the looks compared to the facelift model are a little bit more mundane. However, the 8th gen Civic wasn't extremely aggressive with its styling either. So I don't really understand why people were complaining that much. But before I freeze to death, I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video of the 9th generation Civic Si. Again, thanks to Noel for letting us take a look at his car today. And if you're interested in buying one, you can let me know in the email below. But again, thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye, peeps.